Ed Roth-Taylor is a villain who appears immediately after we start the game, using his status as a nobleman. He hit the main character's childhood friend, but he ended up being punished. Not stopping there, with a heart full of revenge, Ed then cheated on the main character's Sylvania Academy entrance exam. But he was caught by a girl who came to take the entrance exam while hiding her identity. She is Phinia Elias Clole, the third princess of the Kingdom of Clole. Ed was then immediately interrogated by Phinia, who has an insight skill that can detect lies and conspiracies of the target. Ed Roth-Taylor, who was caught in a pathetic state, gritted his teeth and made many excuses. But all his lies were exposed by Phinia's insight skill. He was then expelled from the dormitory. Everyone in the academy probably hated Ed Roth-Taylor. Phinia then asked Ed, what was he doing here? Ed really had bad luck because he met someone who shouldn't have met. Phinia then realized that the academy had not expelled Ed. Ed only replied that he was also still a student here, but he was still expelled from the dormitory. Hearing that, Phinia didn't want to mince words anymore. She then told Ed to just get out of the academy. She couldn't bear to see someone as shameless as him hanging around the academy. She would talk to the academic department and personally request his expulsion for the crime of committing a despicable act as a student of this academy. For the crime of cheating another student by trying to block his way to a better future. Hearing that, Ed didn't pay any attention to her words at all. Instead he felt annoyed that his fish was getting burnt from listening to her talk for too long, even though Phinia said that she would speak briefly. Besides the burnt food being a problem, in any case this was a life crisis, because this person, Princess Phinia, really had the power to expel him from the academy. Therefore, with a threatening expression, Ed then asked, the sun will be setting soon. Aren't the nobles always guarded by heavily armed soldiers? With an intimidating look, he continued, could a noble princess come to a remote forest like this alone? But Phinia wasn't afraid of that at all, and said that he would regret it if he was going to threaten her because he thought she wasn't guarded. But Ed didn't mean to threaten her at all. He then knelt down and said that he wanted to thank her. Phinia naturally doubted Ed's sudden change in behavior. She then activated insight to prove the truth of his words, but she was surprised, because the skill insight stated that there was no lie in Ed's words. Ed knew the reason why Phinia looked surprised. The Roth-Taylor family that Ed came from was very famous and had great influence, but the Roth-Taylor family used that privilege to exploit the population and run human experiments for research on eternal life. For the main character, it was a family of trash that was destined to be destroyed. People in that family would be imprisoned or executed. However, he was now not recognized as part of that family anymore. He was cold and hungry now, but this was still better than dying. In the long run, this was actually good for him, so he needed to persuade Phinia like this without lying, or else, he would be expelled from the academy. When that happened, this would be game over for him. Looking at the timeline, when around Ed Roth-Taylor was expelled, this time should be about a week before school started. He wondered what was the reason Phinia was here. After struggling with his thoughts, Ed then said to Phinia, by coming here unescorted and wearing simple clothes, this could only mean that she must be completing the class placement exam. Professor Glass's class placement test. This was a test to find the magic bead hidden in the forest. Professor Glass's test was known to be rather cruel. Of course, if it was Princess Phinia, she would aim for the best class, which was Class A. Phinia only thought Ed was trying to flatter her and said that he hadn't changed at all. She felt that she should ask the academy to expel him immediately. But she was then shocked when she heard Ed say, but without his help, she would never be able to get into Class A. If his words were a lie, Ed allowed her to expel him from the academy. Ed continued, if she goes to the lake in the southeast of this forest, there is a small grassy island. There is a giant tree in the center of the island. The tree was called Marilda's guardian tree. There, she would find the present he left behind. Phinia looked incredulous because she found what she was looking for by following his clues. This really changed the impression of Ed in her mind. Ed Roth-Taylor, who from 3 days ago was clearly a liar and a cheater, she still clearly remembered his miserable situation at that time. However, the Ed from earlier was completely different from the Ed from before. Phinia could only remain silent while thinking about it, until finally it came to the time when the class placement exam had officially ended. Professor Glass then told the students to take out the beads they had gotten. Some students then took out the strange objects they had managed to get. Professor Glass was silent for a moment, seeing that. He then immediately put them into Class F. The intention of the examiner is worth noting. This exam is not just about finding just any magic bead, Professor Glass said. Those who will enter Class A are only those who find beads that lack magic power. Only 3 people found this type of bead. They are Zix, Lortel, and finally someone who found a bead hidden in the guardian tree of Marilda whose height of magic power was unusual. Professor Glass then pointed to the student. She was of course Phinia. She would now be the top-ranked student in the class because of that. Back to Ed. Ed was still lamenting about his burnt fish. He now didn't even have the energy to use a spear anymore. He was now making a simple fishing rod with makeshift materials. He then thought about the third princess of the kingdom, Phinia Elias Kloll. Since she was a child, Princess Phinia was used to flattery and sophistry, which was the reason she sharpened her insight, which led to the creation of her innate ability. No one could escape from her insight, therefore, there was no choice but to give her the real information, but that also led to more complicated problems. The reason that the high-handed Princess Phinia would later be called the Princess of Love was because after facing failure during the class placement exam, she will enter Class F. Then after that it will start to change. However, if Phinia, who had a great influence in the original scenario, found the golden bead and entered Class A, then the main story scenario would collapse. Even if he managed not to be expelled, all the information he had would be useless, then she would be finished. But still, there was still the top rank in the class. She was Lucy Merrill. Ed felt that the future might remain unchanged. Insight will always see the truth. Phinia also noticed an irregularity. Ed was not lying, but this was not a present. Actually, the reason why Princess Phinia hid her identity was because she was ashamed of the special treatment she would get if her identity was revealed. She wanted to prove herself. Just by looking at her bead she immediately knew that it would give her the best results in the exam. But Phinia could not take the bead, as finding it would be something that she didn't accomplish on her own. The title of Princess of Love that she would get in the future was not a skill or stat, but rather a title that she would get for walking the path of justice. Ed had thrown the bait to the princess. Whether it was truth or lies did not seem to matter so much. The princess could always distinguish between the two, although if Ed Roth-Taylor really believed the princess would fail the exam, she was sure she could succeed and show it off in Ed's face. However, Ed Roth-Taylor did not lie. Because she really could not get into Class A, the princess now could not do anything else. With a feeling of annoyance, Phinia said she would keep an eye on Ed. While Ed himself was now busy fishing, he was very happy when he finally caught a fish. Time passed until finally arrived when the Sylvania Academy began. Ed seemed to live in a place where he had to start running from early morning to get to school on time. He ran as hard as he could, until finally he arrived. He returned to the Sylvania Academy. When the academy opening ceremony was about to begin, the students were seen sitting neatly while listening to the speech from the school and eating the dishes provided. Ed was certainly present there. He could hear the whispers that spoke badly about him. But he decided to ignore it, and began to enjoy his meal. He himself seemed to have finished a lot of dishes by looking at the many plates piled up on his table. His goal now was graduation. The students were now still talking about it, but some of them noticed something different about him. Ed continued to enjoy his meal while listening to the conversations of people around him. He didn't have any ambitions, he just wanted to graduate. There were some female students who were talking about the dessert cooked by the famous chef and decided to try it, and one of the female students felt something strange about Ed. For some reason he felt like a different person. Ed himself hoped that he could go through his school period quietly, and nothing happened.
So, friends, this chapter comes to an end. What will happen next? We'll uncover it in the next chapter. Don't forget to rate this chapter out of 10 in the comments. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care and goodbye. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.